Uh, I have another disturbing story here, which is somewhat related to the previous one. I've mentioned on the live stream before that, as shocking as it sounds, there was support for pedophilia uh, amongst politicians in the 1970s and 80s. High figures in the Labour Party and elsewhere, also in Germany. This story, again, it just seems made up. It is so monstrous. Horrifying Berlin foster experiment saw kids deliberately given to pedos to see if sex abuse was good for them. Victims of a warped social experiment in Germany, where authorities deliberately place troubled kids with pedophile foster parents, are set to win compensation. Between 1969 to 2003, those homeless boys aged between 6 and 14 were handed over to pedos because it was thought the vulnerable kids might benefit from their attention. How is it that people are not in prison over this? How is it that people are not executed because of this? The twisted logic behind the Kentler experiment, named after the leading sexologist Helmut Kentler, who spearheaded it, was that pedophilia could have positive consequences. Astonishingly, in the late 1960s, Kentler managed to persuade West Berlin's ruling Senate that homeless boys would leap at the opportunity to be fostered by pedophile dads. It was successfully argued that they would be head over heels in love with their new father figures. About this time, Kentler was publicly lobbying for decriminalization of sex between adults and children in West Germany. The academic argued youngsters almost always are more seriously damaged by their abusers being prosecuted than by the abuse itself. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? But despite his openly positive views on pedophilia, Kentler was given official blessing for a pilot that paved the way for the experiment. This arranged for boys to move in with three well-known West Berlin pedophiles so they could then learn to live proper, unremarkable lives. Later, he explained he believed that three men would do so much to help their boys because they had a sexual relationship with them. It's not clear whether the West Berlin Senate voted on the experiment or agreed to it behind closed doors. But details are now beginning to come to light of the grotesque policy as the victims demand justice for their ordeal. Two of the fostered victims are in line for a compensation payout from the city Senate. They were so emotionally disfigured by their ordeal, they are unable to work. One of the victims' lawyers is reportedly pressing for a lump sum of 100,000 euros plus a monthly pension of 2,500 euros. The legal proceedings refer to one boy called Marco, who had been taken into care in 1989 after fleeing his violent dad. Age 6, he was placed with his foster father. Fritz H. began going into a room for a cuddle, which heralded years of abuse. In an interview with Der Spiegel, Marco said for 10 years he was repeatedly beaten and raped by Fritz H. until he grew up and fought back. Another of his victims, known as Sven, was abandoned by his parents at the age of 7 and contracted hepatitis B on the streets of Berlin. Authorities in 1990 then gave him to the pedophile, and he suffered repeated sexual assaults, which were allegedly videoed. Boys in the care of Fritz, who has since died, were kept isolated from the outside world. So many questions, not least why the Kentler experiment was ever allowed, remain unanswered. The city government, it says, it has no idea who in West Berlin's welfare agency agreed to the so-called Kentler experiment. It has since set up a hotline for former kids. 4 years ago, the Berlin Senate commissioned a public inquiry into the scandal being carried out by experts at Göttingen University. But this is still ongoing, and the final report is nowhere near being published after 4 years. When Kentler died in 2008, he left behind papers describing the entire experiment as a success, but shockingly, he admitted placing youths with pedophiles broke the law. This is well, what's happened, in Rochdale, in Oxford, many places in Britain, and what I've just described in Berlin. This is the stuff which manages to creep into the news from time to time. Right now we're being told that we all have to bow down before the government experts and do exactly what they tell us to do, because I suppose they have our best interests at heart. But, as I just mentioned, in Britain for decades, thousands of teenage girls were raped, forced to work as prostitutes. The authorities knew about it. They did nothing about it. And in West Berlin, the authorities decide to provide boys for known pedophiles because it is supposedly in their best interests. I don't know about you, but I am not so keen on so-called experts.